The phone rang, its sound piercing through the stillness of the night, shattering the silence of the empty house. I jumped, heart pounding. My name was Emily, and I was not expecting any calls. I was home alone, it was a Friday night, and my parents were out for the evening. The house felt unusually quiet, almost eerie, with only the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards breaking the silence. I stared at the landline, its shrill ring echoing through the empty rooms. Caller ID, unknown. My mind raced with possibilities. Who could be calling at this hour? A shiver snaked down my spine. Hesitantly I answered. Hello? Silence. The kind of silence that makes you question if someone is there at all. Hello? I repeated, my voice trembling slightly. The silence on the other end was deafening, amplifying my anxiety. The only response was a soft, almost indiscernible whisper. It was so faint that I could barely make out if it was a voice or just static. It was too low to make out any words, but it sent chills down my spine. My imagination ran wild, conjuring images of shadowy figures and unseen threats lurking in the darkness. I hung up, shaken but trying to dismiss it as a prank call. It had to be. Yet the unease lingered, making every shadow seem more menacing, every creak more sinister. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone or something was out there, waiting. The night stretched on, and I found myself jumping at every little sound, my mind playing tricks on me. I tried to distract myself, turning on the TV, but the noise only seemed to amplify my anxiety. The phone rang again, and this time I didn't answer. I let it ring, each shrill tone a reminder of the unknown caller. The fear was palpable, and I knew that this night was far from over. Minutes later, the phone rang again. Unknown number. This time I let it go to voicemail. A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I tried to focus on my homework, but the silence of the house pressed in on me. Every creak and groan sounded amplified, setting my nerves on edge. Curiosity, mixed with a growing sense of unease, got the better of me. I retrieved the voicemail. The same hushed whisper, closer this time, sent shivers down my spine. It was still indistinct, but there was something undeniably menacing about it. I paced the living room, clutching the phone. The dim light cast eerie shadows on the walls, making the room feel even more claustrophobic. Every creak of the floorboards seemed amplified, echoing my growing anxiety. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a reminder of my escalating fear. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, making my hands tremble and my breath come in short, rapid bursts. This was no ordinary prank call. There was something deeply unsettling about the whispered breaths and the persistent silence. It felt as though the caller was deliberately trying to unsettle me, to make me question my own sanity. It was as if the caller wanted me to know they were there, watching, listening. The thought sent shivers down my spine. I glanced out the window, half expecting to see a shadowy figure lurking in the darkness. I considered calling the police but hesitated. What would I tell them? That I was getting silent calls? It seemed so trivial, so insignificant. Yet the fear gnawing at my insides told me otherwise. It sounded ridiculous even to my own ears. I could almost hear the skepticism in the officer's voice, the dismissive tone as they assured me it was probably just a prank. But deep down, a primal fear was beginning to take root. It was an instinctual response, a survival mechanism kicking in. My body was telling me that something was very, very wrong. I was alone and someone or something was toying with me. The isolation only heightened my sense of vulnerability. Every noise, every shadow seemed to take on a sinister quality. I felt like a prey being stalked by an unseen predator. I went around the house, checking the locks on the doors and windows, making sure everything was secure. But no matter how many times I checked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't safe. I sat back down, staring at the phone. The screen was blank, but the memory of the call lingered. I knew I had to do something, but what? The fear was paralyzing, making it hard to think clearly. Taking a deep breath, I decided to call a friend. Maybe talking to someone would help, maybe they could offer some advice or at least provide a distraction from the growing dread. As I explained the situation, I could hear the concern in their voice. They suggested I stay with them for the night, just to be safe. It was a relief to know I wasn't alone in this, that someone else understood my fear. I quickly packed a bag, grabbing essentials and heading for the door. The thought of leaving the house, of escaping the oppressive atmosphere, brought a sense of relief. But as I stepped outside, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. The night was eerily quiet, the silence only broken by the sound of my footsteps. I hurried to my car, locking the doors as soon as I got in. As I drove away, I kept checking the rearview mirror, making sure I wasn't being followed. The empty streets offered no comfort, only a reminder of how alone I was. But I was determined to get to safety, to find some semblance of peace. When I finally arrived at my friend's house, the sight of their welcoming face brought a wave of relief. I knew I was safe, at least for now, but the memory of the call, the fear it had instilled, would stay with me for a long time. The calls continued throughout the night, each one a silent promise of something sinister lurking just out of reach. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, hunted. The once familiar shadows in my house seemed to twist and writhe, taking on menacing shapes in the periphery of my vision. Every time the phone rang, I jumped, my pulse quickening. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening, more terrifying than any words could ever be. It was a heavy, suffocating presence wrapping around me like a shroud. Hours later, as the first rays of dawn peeked through the blinds, the phone finally stopped ringing. Exhausted and terrified, I collapsed on the couch, unable to shake the feeling that the ordeal was far from over. The silence that followed was almost as unnerving as the calls themselves. That's when I noticed it, a faint glimmer of movement outside the living room window. My blood ran cold. It was too early for anyone to be out there, especially not in our quiet suburban neighborhood. Terror rooted me to the spot, my breath caught in my throat and my eyes widened as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The glimmer was gone, but the feeling of dread remained, heavy and suffocating. Could it be my imagination, fueled by a night of terror? Or was someone out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike? I didn't dare move, afraid to draw attention to myself. Then I heard it, a soft scratching sound at the back door, barely audible over the pounding of my own heart. It was slow, deliberate, like someone was trying to pick the lock. Panic surged through me, icy and paralyzing. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers trembling so badly I could barely dial 911. As I pressed the call button, the scratching stopped. Silence descended again, heavier and more ominous than before. I held my breath, listening for any sound, any indication of what awaited me on the other side of that door. The operator's voice, when it finally came, sounded distant and distorted, as if from another world. 911, what's your emergency? Someone's trying to break into my house, I whispered, my voice raw with terror. I'm at... Before I could give my address, the back door swung open with a deafening crash. I screamed, dropping the phone, my eyes darting to the intruder silhouetted against the morning light. And then I saw it. It was a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. My breath caught in my throat, my mind racing to comprehend the horror before me. It wasn't a person at all. The realization hit me like a cold wave, sending shivers down my spine. The figure standing there defied all logic, all reason. It was a figure, tall and gaunt, shrouded in shadows. Its presence seemed to suck the light from the room, leaving only darkness and dread in its wake. Its eyes, two glowing embers, burned into mine, filled with an ancient, unspeakable hunger. They were not just eyes, they were portals to a void, a place where hope and light could not exist. The phone clattered to the floor, the dial tone a shrill, mocking reminder of my isolation. The sound echoed in the silence, amplifying my sense of helplessness. I backed away, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird, until I hit the wall, my escape cut off. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The creature advanced, its clawed hand reaching out from the darkness. Each step it took seemed to resonate with a malevolent intent. The air grew colder, and I could feel the chill of its presence seeping into my bones. And a voice, raspy and low, filled with malicious glee, whispered, "Hello, Emily." The sound of my name on its lips was like a curse, a dark promise of what was to come. "We've been waiting for you." The words hung in the air, heavy with foreboding. It was as if the very walls were closing in, the shadows growing longer, more oppressive. I could feel the weight of countless eyes watching, waiting, anticipating my next move. The light bulb above flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced and twisted, adding to the surreal nightmare that was unfolding before me. Each flicker seemed to pulse with the rhythm of my racing heart. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching into an eternity. The ticking of the clock was a cruel reminder of my impending doom, each tick a step closer to the unknown terror that awaited me. My hands trembled uncontrollably, clutching at a small object for comfort, a futile attempt to anchor myself in reality. But reality had shifted, twisted into something unrecognizable, something horrifying. The shadowy figure moved closer, its form becoming more defined, more menacing. I could see the details now, the gaunt skeletal frame, the elongated fingers tipped with razor-sharp claws, the tattered remnants of what might have once been clothing. My mouth opened in a silent scream, the terror so overwhelming that no sound could escape. My eyes were wide, reflecting the horror that was inching ever closer, threatening to consume me. The atmosphere grew more oppressive, the shadows closing in like a suffocating shroud. I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing down on me, crushing my spirit, my will to fight. The figure's mouth curled into a sinister smile, a grin that spoke of unspeakable horrors and endless torment. It was a smile that promised pain, suffering, and a fate worse than death. Overwhelmed by fear, I collapsed to the floor, my body unable to support the weight of my terror. The cold, hard ground was a stark contrast to the burning fear that consumed me. In a final desperate act, I reached out, hoping against hope that someone, anyone, would come to my aid. But deep down, I knew that no one could save me from the nightmare that had become my reality. The room seemed to grow darker, the sense of anticipation growing with each passing moment. The shadows seemed to pulse with a life of their own, waiting for the inevitable conclusion. The figure loomed over me, its glowing eyes burning with an insatiable hunger. I could feel its breath cold and fetid as it whispered once more, "Welcome to your nightmare, Emily." And with that, the darkness consumed me.